Behind the glamour of British cinema from the 1960s to the 90s, some leading ladies hid impossible tempers. Today, we expose 10 phenomenal actresses who demanded absolute perfection, possessed monumental egos, and made life incredibly difficult for their directors. Which of these legendary cinematic queens was the most unbearable diva on set? Leave a comment below and subscribe to our channel to uncover more dark secrets from the glorious golden era of film. Joan Collins. Ascending to the absolute pinnacle of fame, this London-born actress cultivated an image of flawless perfection that terrified film crews. Born in 1933, she possessed an innate understanding of her magnificent visual power and absolutely refused to compromise it for any director. She did not merely walk onto a set. She held court like a reigning monarch, expecting immediate obedience and anticipating that every single detail would be arranged strictly for her ultimate comfort. During the early stages of her cinematic journey in the 1950s, her legendary reputation for demanding absolute control began to firmly take root. She was intensely aware of her best angles and developed a strict policy regarding lighting arrangements. If a cinematographer set up a shot she considered unflattering, she would halt the expensive production, refusing to deliver a single line of dialogue until the entire visual setup was painstakingly readjusted to her absolute liking. As she transitioned into starring roles in British cinema during the late 1970s, her monumental ego expanded alongside her billing. While working on successful domestic pictures, she essentially commandeered the wardrobe department. Costume designers lived in constant anxiety, as she would frequently reject meticulously crafted outfits moments before a scene, demanding luxurious alternatives and entirely altering the visual aesthetic to perfectly suit her personal glamorous tastes. Her imperious attitude frequently led to spectacular, tense clashes with prominent co-stars and established directors who dared to challenge her authority. She possessed a razor-sharp tongue and rarely hesitated to vocalize her intense displeasure regarding a script. If she felt a particular scene did not center her character adequately, she would fiercely argue her case, demonstrating a regal stubbornness that left exhausted crew members desperately trying to mediate the explosive disputes. The dawn of the 1980s brought her the ultimate defining television role of a wealthy matriarch, completely solidifying her status as an uncompromising diva. Her dressing room transformed into an impenetrable fortress guarded by frightened assistants. Her daily list of specific requirements grew exponentially, ranging from the exact temperature of her beverages to the precise arrangement of her mirrors, terrifying staff who frequently failed to anticipate her unspoken, shifting needs. Despite the immense difficulties she caused behind the scenes, there was an undeniable magic to her imposing presence that kept producers eagerly hiring her. She understood that portraying a powerful woman on screen required an equally formidable personality when the cameras stopped rolling. Her phenomenal career remains a glittering testament to a woman who boldly placed a magnificent crown upon her own head, fiercely demanding the absolute best and refusing to accept anything less than reverence. Diana Rigg. Stepping onto the television sets of the 1960s with classical training and razor-sharp intellect, this Yorkshire-born sensation refused to be dismissed as mere eye candy. Born in 1938, she brought an unprecedented level of fierce independence to her iconic espionage role. However, behind her effortless on-screen combat skills and stylish leather outfits, she was a deeply formidable intellectual force who famously terrorized unprepared directors and lazy scriptwriters. Her reign of terror against the studio executives began when she discovered a shocking financial discrepancy during her defining television series. Realizing she was being paid less than the cameraman, she unleashed a spectacular fury upon the producers. She did not merely ask for a raise, she demanded absolute equality with a terrifying, icy composure. She threatened to walk away from the massively successful production entirely, forcing the panicked executives to immediately surrender to her. Transitioning to the grand cinematic stage in 1969, she secured a legendary role alongside a newly cast, inexperienced leading man in a massive spy blockbuster. The tension on set became legendary as her seasoned discipline violently clashed with his arrogance. Rumors circulated that she deliberately consumed pungent garlic before close scenes to punish him, creating an incredibly hostile and notoriously difficult working environment for the entire exhausted production crew. Returning to her beloved theatrical roots in the 1970s, she solidified her reputation as an uncompromising perfectionist. She tackled the most demanding classical roles with a terrifying intensity, expecting her fellow stage actors to match her relentless dedication completely. If a co-star missed a cue or delivered a mediocre performance, they were subjected to her legendary, devastatingly articulate criticism, which left many seasoned performers trembling in the rehearsal rooms. Her relationship with the British press was equally combative and highly entertaining to observe. She absolutely despised trivial questions about her wardrobe or personal life, frequently eviscerating journalists who dared to cross her intellectual boundaries. She cultivated an imposing aura that made interviewers sweat profusely, shutting down inquiries with a single, freezing glare that explicitly communicated her profound disdain for the entire media circus surrounding her daily existence. Ultimately, her difficult reputation was entirely born from a profound respect for her craft and a fierce refusal to be diminished by a male-dominated industry. She wore her invisible crown with magnificent pride, forging a path for future generations of actresses to demand genuine respect. While directors and co-stars may have found her standards utterly exhausting to accommodate, her uncompromising nature cemented her legacy as one of the most brilliant and terrifying queens of British acting. Glenda Jackson. Emerging from a working-class background in the north of England, this formidable powerhouse possessed a terrifyingly sharp intellect that left directors trembling. Born in 1936, she completely rejected the traditional path of cinematic glamour, choosing instead to dominate the screen with a sheer, uncompromising force of will. She did not demand luxurious dressing rooms or designer gowns. Her crown was forged from absolute artistic perfectionism and a notoriously sharp tongue. Her rise to international prominence during the late 1960s was characterized by spectacular clashes with authoritative figures on set. She famously collaborated with one of Britain's most eccentric and demanding directors, transforming their film sets into intense psychological battlegrounds. They shouted at each other constantly, engaging in furious artistic disputes that horrified the surrounding crew. She simply refused to be directed if she fundamentally disagreed with the vision. When Hollywood attempted to anoint her as their new reigning queen in 1970, showering her with the industry's highest accolades, she displayed a magnificent level of disdain. She completely ignored the glittering awards ceremonies, famously refusing to cross the Atlantic to collect her golden statues. She considered the entire celebratory apparatus to be an absurd distraction from serious acting, treating enthusiastic studio executives with a freezing, devastating indifference. Returning to the classical theatre stages of London, she cultivated a reputation as an incredibly severe and demanding colleague. She expected her fellow actors to match her terrifying level of focus, and those who failed were subjected to a blistering, articulate rage. Rehearsal rooms became arenas where she meticulously dissected the text, frequently correcting esteemed directors and rewriting entire character motivations until they met her extraordinarily high, unyielding personal standards. Her relationship with the global press was arguably the most combative aspect of her entire phenomenal career. Journalists frequently drew straws to decide who would have to endure an interview with her. She despised trivial questions regarding her personal life or appearance, systematically destroying unprepared reporters with a single, highly educated, and utterly ruthless sentence. She created an atmosphere of pure intimidation, demanding intellectual rigor from anyone who approached her. By the early 1990s, she decided that the realm of acting was no longer sufficient for her massive ambitions, taking her formidable temperament directly into the highly combative arenas of British politics. Her legacy in cinema remains entirely unique. She was not a fragile diva throwing tantrums over makeup, but a magnificent intellectual tyrant. She wore her crown with an iron posture, fundamentally reshaping the industry by flatly refusing to suffer fools at any single moment. Sarah Miles. Bursting onto the British theatrical scene with an untamed, highly eccentric energy, this unpredictable actress completely redefined the concept of the rebellious English rose. Born in 1941, she possessed an unconventional beauty and a wildly erratic nature that captivated audiences but utterly terrified her directors. Throughout the 1960s and 70s, she cultivated a legendary reputation as a deeply demanding performer who absolutely refused to follow traditional rules. Her monumental ego truly manifested during the exhausting production of a sweeping romantic epic in 1970. Stranded in an isolated coastal village for nearly an entire year, she constantly clashed with the famously meticulous director. She vehemently disagreed with his rigid methods, frequently disrupting filming schedules with her unpredictable mood swings and demanding profound script changes that left the entire exhausted crew walking on eggshells around her magnificent presence. The intense pressures of massive international film productions frequently pushed her into highly publicized, passionate entanglements with her powerful co-stars. During that same chaotic production, she engaged in a massive romance with her legendary American leading man. This explosive dynamic severely complicated the daily shooting schedule, as her personal drama constantly spilled onto the set, forcing producers to delicately manage her emotional outbursts just to capture a single scene. The most dramatic and controversial chapter of her difficult reputation unfolded in 1973 during a heavily troubled film shoot in America. She became entangled with a young, deeply obsessed business manager who accompanied her on location. Tragically, he passed away under highly mysterious circumstances in her hotel room. The resulting international scandal was absolutely catastrophic, painting her as a dangerous, chaotic diva and nearly destroying her stellar cinematic career. Following this devastating ordeal, she embraced a profound spiritual journey that only amplified her reputation for being incredibly difficult to understand. She sought solace in Eastern philosophies and highly unconventional, bizarre health practices that baffled her remaining industry colleagues. When she did return to the glaring lights of the film industry, she brought these eccentricities onto the sets, demanding specific spiritual accommodations that frustrated pragmatic studio executives. Her relationship with the establishment remained combative until the very end of her prominent screen career. She possessed a terrifyingly sharp intellect and frequently dismissed the entire business of filmmaking as fundamentally absurd. Ultimately, her extraordinary life remains a captivating tale of a fiercely independent woman who wore her invisible crown with an eccentric, unpredictable flair, weathering spectacular storms and leaving a trail of bewildered directors in her magnificent wake. Maggie Smith. Ascending to the absolute highest ranks of theatrical royalty, this magnificent performer possessed a reputation that terrified both seasoned directors and trembling newcomers alike. Born in 1934, she was armed with a spectacularly sharp wit and a devastatingly critical eye. She did not throw vulgar tantrums or smash dressing room mirrors. Instead, she deployed a freezing, intellectual disdain that could completely dismantle a chaotic film set within a matter of seconds. Her legendary intolerance for cinematic mediocrity became abundantly clear during the late 1960s, just as she captured her first major international Academy Awards. She possessed an incredibly precise understanding of comedic timing and dramatic weight, demanding that every single person in her vicinity match her flawless execution. If a fellow actor missed a crucial beat, she would fix them with a legendary, withering stare that silently communicated her absolute disappointment. She completely refused to suffer fools, regardless of their impressive titles or massive studio backing. When working with directors who failed to articulate a clear, intelligent vision, she essentially took command of her own brilliant performances. She would question their mundane choices with a remarkably polite but lethal precision, politely suggesting alternative interpretations that left the supposed leaders of the production feeling utterly redundant and intimidated by her knowledge. Throughout the 1970s and 80s, she frequently dominated prestigious ensemble casts, turning every scene into a masterclass of subtle, devastating power. However, sharing the screen with her was a highly perilous endeavor for lesser talents. She had absolutely no patience for unprepared colleagues who stumbled over their lines or failed to grasp the emotional core of a scene. She would deliver her own dialogue with such overwhelming perfection that others simply vanished. Her relationship with the British and American press was equally formidable and entirely conducted on her own incredibly strict terms. She absolutely despised the superficial promotional aspects of the entertainment industry, treating mundane interviews as an agonizing, tedious chore. Journalists approached her with immense trepidation, knowing that a poorly phrased question would instantly be met with a famously dry, cutting remark that would humiliate them in front of the entire nation. Ultimately, her notoriously difficult reputation was entirely rooted in a profound, unwavering respect for the acting profession. She wore her invisible crown with a terrifying, magnificent grace, never compromising her extraordinary artistic standards to simply make others feel comfortable. She remained an absolute titan of the British stage and screen, a woman whose mere presence demanded immediate excellence and whose brilliant, uncompromising legacy will forever remain truly unmatched. Julie Christie. Emanating an almost ethereal beauty that perfectly captured the spirit of the swinging 60s, this fiercely independent actress was the reluctant face of a generation. Born in 1940, she possessed a breathtaking cinematic presence combined with a deeply defiant attitude towards the traditional studio system. While other starlets eagerly chased fame, she wore her crown with a spectacular sense of burden, absolutely terrifying producers with her profound, unpredictable indifference. Her spectacular rise to global prominence culminated in a massive Academy Award victory in 1965. However, instead of playing the grateful and obedient Hollywood darling, she treated the entire celebrity machine with sheer, unadulterated contempt. She flatly refused to conform to the expectations of powerful executives, viewing their desperate attempts to mold her into a conventional, glamorous commodity as a personal insult to her deeply held artistic and political principles. This profound disdain for the commercial aspects of filmmaking made her notoriously difficult to manage on international sets. She frequently demanded extreme privacy and completely rejected standard promotional tours, leaving furious studio bosses to market massive epics without their leading lady. If a seasoned director attempted to force her into a superficial performance, she would actively rebel, insisting on a raw, unpolished realism that fundamentally clashed with their grand visual plans. Throughout the 1970s, she engaged in a highly publicized, turbulent professional and personal partnership with a legendary American actor and director. Their cinematic collaborations were characterized by intense, exhausting intellectual battles on set. She absolutely refused to be diminished into the role of a passive muse, fiercely arguing over intricate script details and character motivations until the exhausted crew was forced to halt the expensive production schedule entirely. Unlike traditional divas who terrorized film crews by demanding luxurious dressing rooms and endless pampering, her terrifying reputation stemmed from her absolute refusal to compromise. She frequently walked away from massive blockbuster offers and millions of dollars simply because she found the authoritative directors philosophically disagreeable. She considered mainstream commercial cinema to be largely meaningless, leaving powerful producers utterly baffled by her majestic lack of ambition. Her legendary status as a deeply challenging, unapproachable queen of British cinema was permanently forged by this fierce, unwavering independence. She frustrated the entire global entertainment industry by consistently proving that she did not need their validation, their money, or their glittering awards. Her uncompromising spirit and terrifying intellect made her one of the most enigmatic, demanding, and utterly brilliant dramatic actresses of the entire late 20th century on the screen. Samantha Eggar. Possessing an incredibly striking, aristocratic beauty and a fiercely guarded demeanor, this flame-haired actress arrived in the 1960s like a regal force of nature. Born in 1939, she quickly established a reputation for being exceptionally icy and demanding on international film sets. She did not seek to be a beloved sweetheart of the British cinema. Instead, she demanded absolute respect and operated with a spectacular, uncompromising haughtiness. Her monumental cinematic breakthrough arrived in 1965 with a highly disturbing psychological thriller. However, behind the incredible critical acclaim and an Academy Award nomination lay a heavily troubled production. She completely clashed with the legendary, notoriously demanding director. Refusing to be bullied into submission, she fought back with an intense, freezing stubbornness that absolutely terrified her co-stars and created a terribly tense atmosphere on the entire set. Following this spectacular global triumph, she cultivated an impenetrable, regal aura that made her incredibly difficult to approach. When cast alongside established leading men of the era, she rarely engaged in friendly banter or superficial socializing between the complex takes. She treated the acting profession as a deeply serious, solitary endeavor, frequently dismissing the attempts of her charismatic male co-stars to charm her, leaving them feeling profoundly rejected and humiliated. By the late 1960s, Hollywood executives desperately attempted to turn her into a conventional, highly profitable leading lady. However, her monumental ego and impossibly high artistic standards proved to be an absolute nightmare for the studio system. She rejected numerous lucrative scripts that she deemed intellectually beneath her, treating powerful producers with a chilling indifference that completely baffled an industry accustomed to starlets begging for any cinematic opportunity. Transitioning into prominent television roles during the 1970s and 80s, she brought her terrifyingly high standards to the small screen. She expected television crews, who usually worked at a frantic pace, to accommodate her meticulous, methodical approach to character development. If a director attempted to rush her performance to meet a tight broadcasting schedule, she would simply halt the entire production, fixing the panicked crew with a legendary, terrifyingly cold glare. Her incredibly uncompromising nature meant she eventually stepped away from the most massive blockbuster roles, preferring to maintain her absolute artistic integrity over achieving superficial global superstardom. She wore her invisible crown with a spectacular, terrifying grace, ensuring that no director or studio executive could ever force her to compromise her brilliant standards. She remains a fascinating, deeply imposing figure in British acting history, an absolute queen of the silver screen. Charlotte Rampling. Born in 1946, she possessed a gaze so piercing and formidable that it became universally known as the Look. Stepping into the vibrant heart of the swinging 60s, she completely rejected the superficial, cheerful image expected of young British starlets. Instead, she cultivated an aura of absolute mystery and intellectual superiority, wearing a heavy, invisible crown of psychological depth that thoroughly intimidated directors and terrified her male co-stars. As she transitioned into the 1970s, her reputation for being an incredibly difficult and uncompromising performer solidified entirely. She did not throw spectacular, noisy tantrums on international film sets. Instead, she deployed a freezing, majestic silence that could completely paralyze a production. If a seasoned director suggested a conventional approach to a scene, she simply refused to respond, staring them down until they nervously abandoned their entirely mundane artistic vision. Fleeing the traditional constraints of the British and American studio systems, she sought refuge in the highly experimental realm of European cinema. In 1974, she starred in a profoundly controversial and psychologically harrowing film that shocked the entire world. During this grueling production, she demanded an emotionally exhausting level of intensity from the entire crew. She refused to break character between takes, enveloping the set in a dark, oppressive atmosphere. Her interactions with prominent leading men were equally legendary and highly combative. She absolutely despised actors who relied on superficial charm or conventional handsome features, demanding a rigorous intellectual sparring match before the cameras even started rolling. Many famous actors found themselves utterly dismantled by her penetrating intellect and her outright refusal to flatter their massive egos, leaving them feeling exposed, deeply insecure, and thoroughly outmatched on their own sets. When Hollywood executives inevitably attempted to lure her into highly lucrative, mainstream blockbuster projects during the 1980s, they encountered an impenetrable fortress of artistic arrogance. She viewed commercial American cinema with a spectacular level of disdain, frequently rejecting incredibly wealthy offers because she found the scripts fundamentally simplistic. She treated powerful studio bosses like absolute beginners, questioning their artistic integrity with a terrifying elegance. Ultimately, her notoriously intimidating reputation was completely born from a fierce, unyielding dedication to the darkest, most complex corners of human nature. She was an absolute queen of the silver screen who flatly refused to perform like a trained, obedient circus animal for the global entertainment industry. She wore her magnificent crown with a chilling grace, ensuring her legacy as one of the most uncompromising, brilliant, and terrifyingly demanding actresses in British cinematic history. Susanna York. Bursting onto the silver screen with piercing blue eyes and an angelic face, this remarkable actress hid a terrifyingly stubborn intellect beneath her delicate exterior. Born in 1939, she absolutely refused to play the role of the compliant, grateful starlet that the British studio system expected. Instead, she arrived on set wearing an invisible crown of profound artistic arrogance, immediately establishing a fearsome reputation as a woman who would never be easily controlled. As her cinematic career skyrocketed throughout the 1960s, so did her clashes with authoritative figures. She treated scripts not as final blueprints, but as mere suggestions to be dismantled. If a prominent director could not explain the deep psychological motivation behind a single line of dialogue, she would flatly refuse to deliver it. Her relentless, exhausting questioning frequently brought massive international film productions to a complete, terrifying, and grinding halt. The absolute peak of her rebellious nature was spectacularly displayed during the Academy Awards season in 1970. After receiving a prestigious nomination for a grueling cinematic masterpiece, she completely horrified the establishment. Instead of expressing humble gratitude, she furiously lashed out at the producers for campaigning on her behalf without her explicit permission. She publicly denounced the entire ceremony as a deeply offensive and entirely meaningless popularity contest. This astonishing public display of contempt for the global film industry completely terrified Hollywood executives. On set, her terrifying presence was not marked by screaming fits, but by a freezing, articulate anger. She would frequently pause a complicated scene to deliver a devastating intellectual critique of the director's visual choices. She expected her co-stars to maintain an impossible standard of emotional truth, completely destroying those who relied on superficial acting techniques. Throughout the 1970s, she actively alienated powerful producers by aggressively rejecting highly lucrative roles in mainstream blockbusters. She viewed commercial American cinema with spectacular disdain, considering it intellectually hollow. When frantic agents begged her to be more cooperative and accept profitable work, she simply fired them with a magnificent, chilling indifference, cementing her status as an entirely unmanageable and fiercely independent creative force in cinema. Returning to the prestigious theatrical stages and complex European films, she continued to demand absolute creative control over every single project. Her notoriously difficult reputation was the direct result of her absolute refusal to wear the glittering but restrictive collar of the commercial entertainment industry. She remained an uncompromising titan of British acting, a spectacular queen who defended her artistic integrity with a terrifying, unyielding, and completely magnificent grace. Vanessa Redgrave. Born in 1937 into the absolute highest ranks of a legendary British theatrical dynasty, she carried a towering, imposing presence from the moment she first stepped onto a stage. She did not merely act, she believed it was her divine right to command the entire artistic space. With her statuesque height and a terrifyingly sharp intellect, she immediately established a formidable reputation as an actress who wore her hereditary crown with a spectacular, uncompromising heaviness. Throughout the late 1960s and 70s, her phenomenal cinematic talent was matched only by her incredibly explosive political radicalism. She treated international film sets not as professional workplaces, but as grand platforms for her deeply held, uncompromising ideologies. If a director dared to interrupt her intense political lectures to the exhausted crew, she would respond with a freezing, articulate fury that could completely paralyze the expensive production schedule. She completely refused to separate her radical personal beliefs from her artistic endeavors, terrifying powerful studio executives who merely wanted to produce profitable entertainment. She would frequently demand that controversial political pamphlets be distributed among the cast and crew, creating a deeply uncomfortable and highly hostile environment. Producers found themselves constantly battling a magnificent intellectual tyrant who fundamentally viewed commercial cinema with deep disdain. The absolute pinnacle of her controversial, uncontrollable nature was spectacularly broadcast to the entire world during the Academy Awards ceremony in 1978. Upon winning a highly prestigious acting prize, she completely ignored the traditional, humble acceptance speech. Instead, she delivered a blistering, fiercely political tirade that ignited a massive chorus of boos from the shocked audience, utterly horrifying the Hollywood elite and cementing her dangerous reputation. Following this unprecedented public display of magnificent rebellion, she became notoriously difficult to ensure and manage on mainstream American film sets. She absolutely demanded that every single script she accepted align perfectly with her strict personal morals, frequently halting productions to rewrite dialogue she found ideologically unacceptable. Her fellow actors were forced to navigate around her towering ego and her absolute, uncompromising certainty in her intellectual superiority. Despite the immense chaos and profound anxiety she brought to nearly every production, her raw, devastating cinematic talent remained entirely undeniable. She continued to secure incredibly complex, demanding roles simply because her on-screen presence was genuinely magnificent. She wore her invisible crown with an iron posture, fundamentally reshaping the industry by flatly refusing to be silenced, leaving a legacy as the most brilliant, terrifyingly difficult queen of British acting history.